And we're back. Another week, another episode of The Watchmen, and this is your companion podcast presented by The Disorderly. Please head over to thedisorderly.com for the best in sports and entertainment. If you want to check me out over at the Ratings Pending podcast, I joined them as a guest this week to discuss Dr. Sleep and a whole bunch of other stuff. You know me, I slipped in some leftovers talk because I'm a huge Damon Lindelof guy. So if you want to check that out, head over to ratingspending.com and give episode 15 a listen. But speaking of Lindelof, this was the most Lindelofian episode of the season so far, and that all started with the cold opening. Season 1, episode 4, entitled If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own. Kind of a meta title there as well. You're instantly presented with a what in the world is going on moment, and the ending actually sandwiches it with another one. But let's start at the beginning. We finally meet Lady True. Before this episode, we know that she reads every paper at the newsstand, that she built a big-ass clock called the Millennium Clock, the eighth wonder of the world, the first wonder of the New World, and most importantly, she bought Adrian Veidt's company after his disappearance, but we've never actually seen her until this opening scene, and what a scene it was. So we get this montage about the Clarks, a childless husband and wife who live in a farm in Oklahoma, all while the Bee Gees are playing in the background. Once again, felt very much like a scene from The Leftovers, maybe. Not so much Lost, but it had that Lindelof feel to it. The wife is selling fresh eggs to no avail. She spills the eggs, which seems to have some sort of symbolic tie into the fact that she's childless, and that specifically she's childless because her eggs aren't viable. But nevertheless, they seem happy. But there also seems to be this underlying sadness, and we're about to find out why. The doorbell rings, and here's Lady True. Now, she's described in the scene by Mrs. Clark. Lady True is apparently a trillionaire who's building the big clock down the road. She's been in Oklahoma for a year, but she rarely comes out of her house, and she wants to buy the Clark's house, or the 40 acres that it sits on, which feels like the more relevant piece here. I don't think that she cares about the house. I think she wants that land for some reason. Lady True says she got rich making advanced pharma and biomedical tech. She also says that she owns a number of fertility clinics, and the Clarks visited one of them 10 years ago, but we're told Mrs. Clark's eggs weren't viable, as I mentioned. Well, you know what Lady True says to that? She says, bullshit, very loud and aggressively. That happens a few times in this episode when she sort of jars you with like, whoa, like take it down a notch, which I like. I like that little character quirk. You're always on edge around her. She's like extremely polite and pleasant, and then she just has these kind of outbursts. Anyway, Lady True went ahead and cooked a baby out for them. Some pretty freaking unnatural shit. She just walks in with a baby that she made basically using their sperm and egg from the fertility clinic, and all of a sudden her daughter comes in with this little baby and hands her right to the Clarks. She also drops $5 million into their account, says it should be enough to cover baby expenses and cover the move and all this stuff. It sounds super nice, right? Well, she also gives them 30 seconds to decide on whether or not they want the baby, or she will, quote, destroy the baby. Now, this was a joke, but it's still a pretty morbid one, and once again kind of gives you a peek into, for lack of a better word, what kind of weirdo Lady True is. Well, suddenly the lights flicker, the house rumbles, and everyone scurries outside to see what appears to be a comet shooting out of the sky. I think it's safe to assume that comet is Dr. Manhattan arriving back to Earth. I don't know. Or maybe Adrian Veidt somehow involved with that catapult. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I don't know. Either way, Lady True seems, unsurprised by this, but actually kind of delighted, and she says, quote, "That is mine." We cut to Angela, who is wiping her bakery free from evidence that her grandfather is being held there. We also learn, I think for the first time, or maybe I just didn't notice it before this, that her bakery is called Milk and Hanoi Bakery, a pun, obviously, on milk and honey, where we let Saigons be Saigons. Cheesy, but I kind of think that's the point. Hey, I laughed. I'm not going to judge. I laughed. Sister Knight breaks into the Greenwood Cultural Center after receiving a phone call that a new branch of her family tree is now accessible. Now, I really loved the imagery here. It's got that sort of Disneyland theme park feel to it. They print out a little acorn that you plant to discover your family tree. It's all like this fun, sort of sugar-coated experience. Meanwhile, you've got these holograms of the victims of this horrible race riot. One lady is describing her family being gunned down. You've got Klansmen with torches, and that sort of juxtaposition is really kind of twisted. It really pulls out the horror of this to be like in this setting of just like a fun like theme park museum type deal. It shows how commercial it all is, and a lack of any real empathy. Like, hey guys, plant the magical acorn and see your ancestors who nearly got wiped out in an incident of racial violence. Well, that sounds like fun, right? I really enjoyed that, the way they wrote that scene and kind of designed that set. Also, this system is clearly not the most sophisticated because it has on record that Will died as a boy with both his parents during the massacre of 1921, but it also identifies him as Angela's grandfather. So unless the kid, sired a child when he himself was a child, there's clearly a flaw in logic there. Also, remember the baby who little boy Will picked up in the field? We still don't know who that is. got to remember that little cliffhanger for the future. It's definitely meaningful. It's on some level, right? Anyway, moving on. Angela hears her car fall out of the sky with Lori laughing hysterically, which is where we left things in the last episode. Nothing was stolen from the car, but old man Will left his pills in the glove compartment. Very unlikely that was an accident. He obviously wanted her to find those pills. By the way, Angela's husband in the next scene sure takes a hard stance about the whole death and religion thing when it came to his super tiny young niece. He tells her that heaven is pretend, that we were nothing, that we are alive, and then we are nothing again. Now, this is all reference to Uncle Judd, but it also informs the girls what happened to our own parents when they died, right? Like, keep in mind, these are children of slain police officers. So I think a little bedside manner would have gone a long way there. Feel however you want about the afterlife, by the way, but it was just such a blunt way of putting it. They seemed fine, though. I think someone offered up waffles, and they started screaming for joy. So, the resilience of kids, it's something to envy. Angela goes to visit Looking Glass, who's in his underground bunker / photo darkroom, I guess. He's developing photos of the squids from the last squid fall and provides a little more context on them, because right now we still don't know that much information about the reality of these squid falls. He said that they rain down from another dimension, probably just as confused as we are, 30 seconds of life, and they spend all of it dying. Now, I think we know that they're not actually from another dimension, although I guess they could be. I don't know how they tie in with whatever Adrian's up to now. Anyway, Angela gives the pills to Looking Glass because apparently his ex works at a lab and can process them without raising any red flags. In other words, without actually bringing them to the police department lab. She also shows Looking Glass the KKK outfit, and he suggests that it could be a keepsake because it's old school. His dad was a lawman. I'm not buying that story. I'm not buying that he's a racist KKK member. I think there might be some sort of truth that we haven't learned yet about old Judd there. But Looking Glass seems to be a good dude. I would really hate it if there's some sort of turn there, because I think so far he's really standing out as one of my favorite characters. I don't know. We'll see. Fingers crossed on that front. Angela takes the duffel bag that she filled with old man Will's chopped up wheelchair, tosses it off of a bridge onto a dump truck. Then, in what is probably the weirdest moment of the episode, Angela turns to find a tall, lanky guy in a silver bodysuit watching her. She begins to chase him down, but he sprays something on his head and slips into a narrow sewer grate opening. To echo the words of Angela Abar herself, what the fuck? What the fuck? I don't know what we just saw there. I have no explanation. There's no context as far as I know. It doesn't tie in with the comics at all. That's a weird one, so we'll see what's going on with that guy and how it ties in. I don't know. I can't explain that one. But that's the fun of these Lindelof universes. They rarely do make sense, at first, and he always finds a way to bring us home. I'm excited for it. The only context I can find as it stands alone in this episode is that they're showing us the presence of other vigilantes while simultaneously showing us that nobody will care unless it has to do with the 7th Cavalry and specifically the slaying of the police chief. Meanwhile, Lori tests the fingerprints in the car and finds that they belong to someone named William Reeves, different last name, which makes sense given the fact that he's a missing person and would naturally have a different identity if he was still alive. But we also learned that he was apparently a cop in New York City in the 40s and 50s, but went off the grid after retiring young. This continues to fit the narrative that old man Will is, in fact, hooded justice. I mean, he has to be, right? That's almost like a foregone conclusion. I think people decided really early, almost before the show started, that Jeremy Irons was playing Ozymandias or Adrian Veidt. This seems maybe not as quite obvious, but, close. And bravo to Lori for, kind of shaking everything up. I heard the Ball Move guys talking about this last week. I actually think it may have been a reader email that pointed it out, but her presence really does turn the entire cast of characters on their head, and that was extremely noticeable on the car ride to go see Lady True. She unnerves Angela by going to her house and speaking to her husband. The entire hunt for evidence involving Angela's car seems to throw her off as well, as does the gentle but, persistent prying into Angela's past and psychological breakdown of, why she is driven to be a superhero. And by the way, that scene, I loved how Agent Petey was in the back of the car for the whole conversation, but they don't actually reveal that info until most of the way through the scene. And then he, of course, gives a breakdown on Lori, which is basically just a recap of who she is in the comics. I wasn't sure if they would do that for the television audience or just kind of keep it vague, but now we do have an answer. And Petey doesn't really hold back on the description, saying that Lori is the daughter of the comedian and Silk Spectre, and immediately explaining that the comedian sexually assaulted Silk Spectre and that Lori didn't find out until later, which is all information that book readers already knew, but it was interesting that they slipped it into a conversation in the show to sort of catch up the television audience. And they did it in a funny and entertaining enough way that I had no problem with it. I think some people don't like that sort of spoon feeding of information, but it was a quick, entertaining scene, so I'm on board. When they arrive at True, they learn that there are 6 remote control flying saucers with roughly 100 kilometers in range. The going theory that one of these flying saucers is what picked up Angela's car and then, subsequently dropped it almost onto Laurie's head. They're then escorted to Lady True's vivarium, which, for those who don't know, is basically an artificial, habitat for plants and animals. She says she's basically trying to bring Vietnam to Oklahoma, or, bring it to wherever she is. For some reason, Agent Petey's forced to stay behind, ladies only apparently, and Lady True's daughter tells them that they are building the clock, the first wonder of the new world, all that stuff. While Lady True happily cooperates, giving the police a list of the people capable of flying those saucers and therefore, a list of suspects in the theft of Angela's car. But just when you think this was a simple scene, Lady True reveals her connection with the old man, saying, in Vietnamese, your grandfather wants to know if you got the pills. To which Angela, who is from Vietnam, replies, tell that old fucker he can ask me himself. Now, I'm willing to accept this as a sort of general plot device, but wouldn't it be possible that Laurie also understands Vietnamese? Like, they're kind of rolling the dice, assuming that Laurie wouldn't, understand the language enough to kind of, intercept this secret message. I mean, she's a smart former vigilante, current FBI agent whose dad fought in Vietnam, and now, of course, Vietnam is a 51st state, but whatever, fine. Only Angela understood that. I can accept that as fact. Laurie then sees a golden statue of old man Adrian Veidt, and that transports us to the Adrian Veidt character, who is on a rowboat in the water, fishing for babies with a lobster trap. Yeah, you heard that correctly. This is a weird episode, like I said. One of the weirdest. Adrian takes 2 babies home with him, 1 boy, 1 girl, throws them into some sort of incubator type deal, and turns them into full-grown adults in a matter of minutes, seconds really. A new Mr. Phillips and a new Miss Cruikshanks. So why is there a lake full of baby things? I have no idea. But this is how he turns them into adults. This is how he has clones of all these things, because basically when they turn into adults, they all look the same for some reason. It takes them a little time to develop. First they begin to understand, then they begin to speak, but eventually they become, full-fledged Mr. Phillips, Miss Cruikshanks. Cruikshanks? I don't know. Adrian tells them what they are, describing them as flaws in this thoughtless design. He says that he may be their master for a little while, but he is definitely not their maker, and that they have no purpose except to serve, which obviously begs the question, who is making them? The running theory was that Dr. Manhattan somehow created these things. Obviously, Lady True could be capable of this. She obviously is capable of creating artificial babies. We know this from the beginning. It's seeming more and more likely that she's involved in some way, especially when you factor in that she bought Adrian's company. I mean, this whole scene was just weird. They walk into a room riddled with corpses of other Phillips and Cruikshanks, to which Adrian simply dismisses it as a mess, basically, and said that, he had a bad night. He angrily grabs a horseshoe out of one of the corpses' hands and says, I don't need this. Not yet. He then has the new Phillips and Cruikshanks help him catapult the bodies into the sky, where they promptly disappear after reaching a certain distance. There's actually more information revealed in a monologue here, too. He says that it's been 4 years since he was sent here, and that he thought it was a paradise at first, only to realize it's not. It's a prison. But with their help and their lives, he'll find a way to escape. So yeah, where are these babies coming from? Who created this prison? Where is he even? These are all, very, very important questions. Back in Tulsa, Angela reconvenes with Cal, and she's mad that he kept the secret about visiting with Laurie. It would appear that he did this because she was also keeping secrets, and he wanted, to be involved. But yet another mystery is introduced when Angela says, she knew we met in Vietnam. Did you tell her about your accident? He says, no. But now we as an audience know there's been some sort of accident. We don't know what that accident is. So yet another mystery introduced. Finally, we end things back in the vivarium when Lady True's daughter wakes up from a nightmare and tells her mom what happened. This is interesting for a couple reasons. For one, it was the first time we see her acting like a normal child. Just looking for her mom because she got scared in the middle of the night instead of basically like a professional, high-level assistant or something. She's acting like a kid in this scene. And second, when we first saw her in bed, she was hooked up to all these fluids and almost seemed like more of a science experiment than a normal girl. I don't know what's going on there. Could that be some sort of high-tech, like, nutrient feeding system to make her grow into a, perfectly smart, capable adult? I don't know. Could it be something a little more, sci-fi, less real world? Possibly. I don't know. But it was out of the ordinary. I mean, I don't sleep with an IV next to my bed. But then, of course, there was the nightmare itself. She dreamt that she was in a small village and that men came and burned it before they made her walk for a long time. She said her feet still hurt and her mom said, good, and then sent her back to bed. Now, what's the deal there? This episode was so loaded with mystery, man. Almost too much to keep track of. So this is sort of the breaking point that a lot of people reach with Damon Lindelof shows where, they just tap out. It happened with Lost. It happened with The Leftovers. Leftovers delivered. Many felt that Lost did not deliver. And, the verdict's still out on this show, so we'll see. But to wrap up the plot, Will and True are talking, and True says that, Will should tell Angela who he is, that the pills in the glove compartment deal was a little passive-aggressive exposition. And then Will accuses her of doing the same thing to her daughter. True says that she's concerned because when family gets involved, deals get broken. Will looks up at the clock, asks how much longer. True says 3 days. Will says he betrayed Angela's family, and in 3 days she'll know what he's done. And thus concludes yet another massive mystery introduced in this episode. So yeah, basically a recap, some context. I didn't really provide a lot of answers because the truth is I don't have them. And I think that's the point at this point in the season. So hopefully they start rolling in soon. There's been like mini mysteries, mini reveals, but these feel like massive ones. Like when is that 3-day thing gonna pan out? And what was up with that guy in the silver suit? That's where I'll leave you this week. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and get ready for another Watchmen Companion podcast next week, hopefully with more answers, less mysteries. Actually, screw it. I can handle some more mysteries if you guys can. But that's it. Thanks for listening. Peace, guys.